East Asia is in turmoil these days, to say the least, and we want to discuss some of the most pressing, urgent, complex, diplomatic, and security issues today right here in this program, Upfront.
Along with a variety of diplomatic and security issues, Northeast Asia has faced fluctuating dynamics these days. Between Korea, China, and Russia, THAAD deployment in the Korean peninsula has risen as one of the critical issues facing the region.
한미 양국은 이러한 북한의 핵미사일 위협으로부터 대한민국과 우리 국민의 안전을 보장하고 한미 동맹의 군사력을 보호하기 위한 자위권 차원의 방어 조치로서 지난 7월 8일 주한미군의 종말 단계 고고도 지역 방어 체계의 배치 결정을 알려드린 바 있습니다.
THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, is an anti-ballistic missile system designed to shoot down ballistic missiles. Korea and the U.S. have established a joint working group as a countermeasure to deal with the North's fourth nuclear test, which took place on January 6, 2016.
Balance was tipped by North Korea's aggressive actions to continue evolving their ballistic missile program, and we are simply ensuring the defense of the Republic of Korea and USFK forces that are helping defend it.
However, after Washington and Seoul announced an agreement to deploy THAAD in the Korean peninsula, China and Russia have strongly opposed the decision, saying that it can be a direct threat to the strategic security of their countries.
사드는 북한 이외의 어떤 제3국을 겨냥하거나 제3국의 안보 이익을 침해하지 않고 또 할 이유도 없습니다. 우리는 우리나라와 국민을 지키기 위한 순수한 방어 목적의 조치를 취하는 것일 뿐입니다.
On the ASEM summit, President Park Geun-hye has focused on strengthening the global cooperation on North Korea's sanctions by tackling the conflicts with the neighboring countries over the THAAD deployment issue. South China Sea territorial disputes was another critical issue that was discussed during the ASEM summit. South China Sea is crucial because it has rich natural resources and it is the world's most important choke point for maritime transit. The Philippines took China to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, and on July 12th, the tribunal ruled in favor of the Philippines against China over territorial disputes by saying that China's claims to South China Sea have no legal basis. Also, the U.S. has emphasized the freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea, which has aggravated a power struggle between the U.S. and China. Aside from the South China Sea issue, possibility of revising Japan's pacifist constitution has also caused another conflict between the U.S., China, Korea, and Japan. Amid the fluctuations in the Northeast Asian region, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has won a sweeping victory in elections to Japan's upper house. And there is now a parliamentary supermajority that supports revision of Article 9 of the Constitution. North Korea's nuclear development and missile launches have been the most significant security issues facing Northeast Asia. And the possibility of Japanese revision of pacifist constitution has also been expected to bring a huge backlash to the region. Comprehensive discussions were made during the ASEAN Regional Forum on a variety of diplomatic and security issues facing the region, and media outlets from all around the world have paid attention to the big event. On the Multilateral Security Summit, which 27 countries, including the U.S., South Korea, Japan, China, and even North Korea, participating countries have had heated disputes on various diplomatic issues facing the Northeast Asian region. Can Korea tackle the ongoing diplomatic conflicts and deter the North's nuclear development amid the fluctuating dynamics in Northeast Asia? Upfront discusses more about the ongoing controversies surrounding the Northeast Asian region.
Well, for today's discussion, we have an interesting lineup of guests today in studio. First, Sean King, Senior Vice President of Park Strategies. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
And Jin Kai, Research Fellow at Yonsei Institute for Sinology, Yonsei University. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with the big picture and actually a very core or essence of the discussion we will be having. That is, we have, like long list of issues that I just mentioned at the opening here. North Korean missiles, nuclear weapons, and the Japanese constitution. But these days, more interestingly, what's happening in the South China Sea and so on. So we have a long list of these conflicts and tensions and so on. What is the main fundamental cause behind this? That is the question that we want to start with here. Some people say G2 confrontation or conflict. Would you agree, Jin Kai, about that observation? This G2 conflict is the main driver behind all these things?
Well, kind of, but I think in big picture, there's, you can imagine two stars, a rising China
You
and a
cannot
returning
or you
US.
can?
We can.
You
We
can,
can
okay,
imagine
okay.
two stars, giant stars.
Or two
So very-
suns in
Two
the
suns,
sky,
yeah, right.
okay.
And a rising China and a returning US. So they were moving actually closer together. If they move closer together with caution, there will be time for the other state to adjust to the existing structure and order. But the problem is they seem to be moved closer too fast. So I think there is a kind of impetuousness with these two great powers. So there will be effect. That effect is kind of a tidal effect or gravity effect to make the rearrangement of the existing structure and orders. And we don't have time to do this.
I see. Jin Kai is saying that the things are happening just too fast, and maybe two powers may not have enough time to adjust themselves to the fast-changing situation. Sean King, what do you say?
Well, one thing I would take issue, he said, the return of the U.S. I would say the U.S. never left Asia. They're definitely increasing in Asia, but I wouldn't say we ever left. Of the three things you mentioned, two are functions of the calendar. The recent Japanese upper house elections has brought forth this discussion in some countries about possible constitutional revision. The South China Sea decision was 3 years in the making. It just happened to be announced on July 12th.
But about Japanese constitution, for instance, wouldn't you say that United States is behind in terms of encouraging Japan to become so-called normal country?
Well, I would caution there's no rush right now to revise the Japanese constitution. Abe would need 2/3 majority in each house. And his partner, New Komeito, a Buddhist party, is very hesitant toward that. And we saw the protests in the street, even toward reinterpreting Article 9, the Constitution. There's not much public appetite for this right now. I think Abe would have to win at least another lower house election in maybe 2 or 3 years before even considering this. So if he does revise the Constitution, which I think he does want to do, we're still a far way from that. The U.S. is
so
not.
you're talking about,
but the U.S. would be happy if Japan did. That's for sure.
Right. So the main driver behind Japanese phenomena, for instance, you're saying is the Japanese domestic politics or
It's
domestic
Japanese
schedule.
Japanese domestic schedule and the concerns of the leaders and the people. The U.S. is not pushing it, but the U.S. would certainly be happy to see it.
What about North Korea in that case then? Some people believe if China could cooperate better with the United States, North Korea problem may have been handled more smoothly so far. And it is because China is challenging the United States and trying to confront the United States or try to have different position against the United States, we're having this North Korean problem being further intensified.
Well, we've had this North Korean standoff with China and the United States since 1953, since the armistice of the Korean War. That's nothing new. I don't think China can control North Korea. North Korea resents all foreign interference or any direction. China can let North Korea collapse and unify with South Korea. It won't for its own reasons. It doesn't want a U.S. client state on its border, treaty ally. And also by having Korea divided, Seoul thinks it needs Beijing to get to Pyongyang, and that keeps Seoul away from Washington and Tokyo. So a divided Korea serves China's interest. So they can let North Korea collapse, but I don't think they can direct what North Korea does.
On that point, is China on a big picture fundamentally at odds against the United States' interest, or fundamentally speaking, China is better positioned to cooperate with the United States?
Well, first of all, I think maybe that you just mentioned on North Korea issue. I think there has been kind of an exaggeration about China's capability to control North Korea. That is not true. And there's another thing very interesting. Think about Cuba and Vietnam. So the U.S. policy to Cuba and Vietnam has been changed. So would that be a clue to the future of North Korea? And that's going to be very interesting. So China has to watch out North Korea at this critical moment after the deployment of that.
So basically, overall, different perspectives and different focus, I suppose. Some people tend to focus more on the domestic politics side, and others believe the big picture of the confrontation between the two powers and so on. Perhaps if we start talking about specific issues, maybe we can have a better picture overall here. Let's start with the way some of us here in Korea seem to believe a very Korean issue, that is the THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System here. And all controversy regarding that. And I'm sure you've been following the issue quite closely as well. Some people believe the reason why we have so much of conflict and controversy about THAAD is because all different countries surrounding this region have their own calculations and their own different views and interests here. Would you agree with that observation to begin with?
Every country is naturally going to have its own view and its own concerns, but this was, at the end of the day, a South Korean decision, and nobody can force South Korea to take that deployment. And I know this has been 3 years of an agonizing decision by the Park government. So yes, all the neighboring countries have their own agendas, their own concerns, their own pet issues to push, but bottom line, it was a Korean decision to take it.
The thing is, however, there are different discussions on that point because some people strongly believe it was the United States' decision to protect U.S. military facilities and presence here. And other people, of course, say it's a Korean decision to protect the Korean people. But these days, having THAAD placed in a little bit further southern region of the country, I think the first view seemed to prevail further. Is there some way you want to argue further against that, the first view or second view?
Yeah, I would say because the Seoul metropolitan area is largely already protected by Patriot missile batteries. So the southeastern portion of the country was unprotected from nuclear ballistic attacks from North Korea. So this covers some of the missing area. And sure, we do want to protect our troops. That's what a military does. But South Korea is also a treaty ally, and we also have an obligation to protect the people of South Korea. So I don't see the two as mutually exclusive.
So they're kind of overlapping concept here.
Correct. Self-mutually reinforcing.
I think that's a very important reminder for all of us here. About THAAD, the Chinese concerns, we really need explanation here. So please tell us.
Well, let me explain Chinese view using the term of friendship.
Friendship?
You know, South Korea had two friends, an old friend and a new friend.
All right.
The old friend asked you to do something that you know the new friend will not be happy with. But still you have the rationality to do it because you have totally, the right of independent making choice based on your own will. But there will be consequences. And you don't expect China to say, hey, buddy, thank you for doing this. But this is international politics, right?
Right.
And China has the reason to be unhappy, just like South Korea has the reason to decide to deploy. And there will be consequences and yet to come.
Does China really believe that the radar of the THAAD system itself is what's bothering China because the X-band radar system is something that the United States can use to read everything that's happening in the important regions of China?
Well, this is prevailing opinion in China. It virtually makes China naked.
Naked?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's pretty dangerous, the X-band radar. So it doesn't matter what you say. Okay, we are not going to use that advanced functions. Okay, but we are not able to go here, come here to see with our Chinese own eyes. It's going to be difficult to prove it.
What would the United States say against that view? Because there is a thing called the security dilemma. It's a well-established notion in international relations, studies, saying that if you want to have full, as he said, naked view of the enemy, the other counterpart, the counterpart will really feel insecure, and they may end up trying to match that imbalance and trying to come up something provocative in return. So the overall, in theory, we will say you don't want to try that hard to expose everything on the counterpart side and then trying to be reasonable, keeping the subtle balance. In that sense, would you say that the United States, by installing THAAD, could actually heighten the uneasiness on the Chinese side? Do you recognize that?
Yeah, definitely. But again, the T in THAAD stands for terminal. So the radar is focused on incoming missiles in the immediate vicinity. It would only be if we turned on the forward radar, which would go 2,000 miles into Chinese territory. But that's not the chief purpose. I'm not saying it could not be used for that in an extraordinary event, but the chief daily purpose of THAAD will be for the immediate vicinity around its placement. That's not going to be turned on every day. I think Chinese concerns are more than just the radar, though. I think it's the anti-aerial access denial capability that China loses, because if there were a contingency over, say, Taiwan or the Senkaku Islands, because President Obama in 2014 became the first U.S. president to say that Japan's Senkaku Islands fall under Article 5 of the U.S.-Japan Defense Treaty. If there were any kind of contingency, that would limit the A2AD capabilities of China. I think China is also concerned if Japan were to take that, the interoperability of Korean and Japanese systems. Right. Is this a step of South Korea joining the ballistic missile defense program? Is this also a precursor to us deploying it elsewhere? Taiwan, perhaps, Vietnam, Philippines. Is this the beginning of something more? So I think the radar may be the least of the concerns, but China does have 4 or 5 big concerns. But this discussion's been going on for 3 years, and it was pretty obvious what it would take to not have to put THAAD in, and I think China lost that opportunity when it had it.
Do you think China really had a good chance to dissuade South Korea not to install the THAAD system? I mean, Sean King has been very clear. This is all about the survival question, even though there are like strategic considerations behind. Realistically speaking, do you think China actually saw a real chance for them to dissuade effectively South Korea, refrain it from actually installing THAAD?
Well, I believe China really wanted to persuade South Korea not to do this, and we failed.
And South Korean side may have felt that not enough was being given to South Korea in terms of China acting enough to restrain North Korea. So how would you respond to that kind of?
Well, that's what I already mentioned about the exaggeration about China's capability to influence over North Korea. And well, sometimes people just expect too much from China. We're not being able to do that.
Then sounds like when China does not have leverage, as much of leverage, you don't have leverage over South Korea as well.
Well, yes, sometimes. But I think our economic ties are not comparable to alliance.
Then that's a very important point, because are you raising a possibility that that China could actually retaliate to South Korea through economic means?
Personal view, I don't think so. I don't hope the trade volume will drop between China and South Korea. That will be a lose-lose situation, and that is going to be happen, I hope. The problem here for South Korea, in my personal view, is could that be a kind of alliance dilemma for South Korea? As we just mentioned, the security dilemma, also the same thing. Maybe in a scenario, South Korea could entrap itself in this kind of a dilemma. Maybe if it entrap itself in a possible future conflict between China and the U.S. So would South Korea, firmly support, commit itself to the U.S. demand in the future?
Right. Actually, that leads us to a very important question about what the countries facing North Korea's provocation will do now about North Korea after the THAAD installation or THAAD decision here. Some people are concerned whether the cooperation among China, United States, Korea, and Japan, or maybe perhaps Russia within the six-party framework will eventually fall apart because of the difference of the view on China and perhaps Russia on one side together with North Korea, and then United States, Japan, and South Korea on the other side being divided. Rising concerns about the international communities or the major powers in the region, the way they deal with North Korea in the future. What do you see there?
Well, I wouldn't equate any kind of China, Russia, North Korea alliance or grouping with South Korea, Japan, and U.S., which is shared with treaties and common values. I think China, Russia, North Korea are revolving marriages of convenience, depending on the situation. It's not the same kind of relationship. And just like Dr. Jin is not going to necessarily say that China is going to retaliate against South Korea for that, I'm not yet ready to say China won't cooperate on the sanctions because of it. It remains to be seen, but let's certainly keep an eye on it. And let's also see what retaliation in terms of tourist arrivals or trade there is at the end of the year. You know, I don't consider Russia a key player here when it comes to North Korea. I think North Korea likes to reach out to Russia now and then to perhaps remind China it has other options, the way it played Moscow off Beijing during the Cold War. And I think Russia wants to show a little love to China, maybe just to anger us because they're mad about us about Ukraine. But I don't really think Russia has a key role here. In terms of sanctions, the U.S. has already increased its own sanctions. Personally, sanctions against Kim Jong-un, sanctions against banks that do business with North Korea, which is indirectly targeted at Chinese banks that handle U.S. dollars for North Korea. And then Japan has its own sanctions as it regards abductions. And South Korea also closed Kaesong. So I am waiting to see what the other side does. But on our side, the three, it seems we seem to be cracking down even harder.
I see. On that point, yes, please.
Yes, I totally agree with you, Sean. I think Chinese policy to the North Korea could not be easily changed. The tricky part here is after decision of deployment of THAAD, China may just have a little doubt over the cooperative spirit among major parties over North Korea issue. But the policy basically will not be changed.
Interesting. Then I have to press you on that point. One could argue that China could actually prefer nuclear-armed North Korea standing alone right there, just surviving in the status quo to maintain the status quo, because the status quo is what China wants, and China does not want to see big change in the Korean Peninsula happening anytime soon. So some people say China may be actually willing to see North Korea standing alone by itself with the help of nuclear weapons and maintaining the status quo as it is. How would you respond to that view?
I would say that could be the least popular opinion, at least in China. I'm not sure about our side. Personally, I don't think that's a very good choice to have a nuclearized North Korea. Think about the relations between Pyongyang and Beijing. It's not good. And we're not, well, I think we could be a very good friend before, but now we're not. So we are not able to control that. We are not to let the escalation of a nuclear issue in the future. We cannot afford that. It's too risky. Simply too risky to do that.
In saying that, would you say China is concerned about the nuclear arms race? Once North Korea is recognized as a nuclear power, maybe South Korea will have to act to nuclearize ourselves, and then Japan might join in as well. Is that China's concern?
Exactly.
And in that case, China could actually lose its status as the single official nuclear power.
So the top principle for Chinese policy in Korean Peninsula is denuclearization.
And China remaining as the only official nuclear power in the region. Okay, that makes good sense. Let's move on to
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, yes, please.
I think that China would definitely prefer North Korea not have nuclear weapons, but
because of the concern of the nuclear arms race
for a lot of issues that I can get into, but I think that they can live with it because they know the nukes are not aimed at them, but they certainly would prefer North Korea not. They would also prefer North Korea open up economically, but the Kim regime can't, because once people get a taste of it, then there's an alternative to the South, right? So China wants North Korea to remain stable, and they can live with them having nukes, but they'd rather them not, because it does give an excuse for others on the far right in South Korea and Japan to consider it. And I would say that also THAAD could be a way for the U.S. to discourage some forces in South Korea from trying to get their own nukes, saying you don't need your own nukes, we're here to protect you. Because
nuclear umbrella.
Right, or at least ballistic umbrella. But the U.S. also doesn't want South Korea or Japan to go have nukes. So anything we can do to further give South Korea peace of mind quiets down some of those who are calling for South Korea to have its own nukes.
The recent years, I think the number one reason, the rivalry, in other words, competition between United States and China. As you know, after inauguration of the Xi Jinping, China tried to reformulate the new type of the great power relationship. And United States, in responding to that policy, they are now pursuing the new strategy of the rebalancing Asia. In other words, pivot to Asia. So while China trying to expand their sphere of influence in Asia, the United States is countering China together with Japan and other Asian countries. The second reason probably, so we have the disputes between United States and China and other members regarding South China Sea. At the same time, so we have more imminent threat from North Korea. North Korean nuclear issue is another reason why we have so many fluctuations in this region. We hope that kind of polarization and the new dynamics will not happen. And the reality in this week when we attended the ASEAN Regional Forum, all the ministers expressed the same concern over North Korea's testing nuclear weapons and long-range missile ICBM. So we made clear the THAAD, deployment of THAAD, will purely defensive purpose. This is the legitimate right to defend our people and our country. And secondly, this is not targeted against any third country, including China. So it's regarding our defense against any possible attack or provocation from North Korea. So we have the bilateral meetings with China. Our foreign ministers met the Chinese Minister Wang Yi, and U.S.-China, they have the meetings. And U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice visited Beijing and met President Xi Jinping. And they agreed, regardless of any difference on certain pending issues, they agreed to implement faithfully the Security Council resolution until North Korea shows that flexibility and is signed to resume the dialogues on the denuclearization of North Korea. You know, July 10th, they have the general elections in Japan, and now the ruling party won. They gain more seats, and they almost have the numbers of the seat, which can revise their pacifist constitutions, particularly Article 9. But we don't see any specific movement. The Japanese political circles, the ruling party, trying to table that revised text of the constitution. But we have traditionally, historically, some past pains regarding the Japanese aggression into Korean Peninsula. That's why we express and convey our concern consistently. Any possibility for Japanese politicians to change their positions regarding the Korean Peninsula. So we share the same views and concern with the public opinion and the civil society, and we have now dialogues and consultation with Japan regarding that issue. The goal time is right, but we think it's a critical time until September. So North Korea, already they made some implications. So Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho in ASEAN Regional Forum in Laos, if United States will not change their positions, they call it hostile policy toward North Korea, they might conduct another nuclear testing, fifth nuclear testing. So this is very worrisome to all the international community. The Asia-Europe meeting in last month, already my president, Park Geun-hye, met many summit levels of meetings with the foreign dignitaries. And also in ASEAN Regional Forum, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se met more than 15 foreign ministers at the sideline of the ASEAN Regional Forum. And coming August, so we have the trilateral foreign minister meeting between Korea, Japan, and China. That's another important meeting when we have the common issues to discuss the North Korean nuclear issues. And coming September, we have another big meeting at the United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly, the many leaders and foreign ministers will gather to have the discussion on the North Korean nuclear issues. So we'll make use of those opportunities at the multilateral meeting or bilateral meeting or trilateral cooperation to deal with the North Korean issue. So this is golden time, but we can gather our support from the whole members of the international community.
Let's talk further about the more contentious hot button issue in terms of the disagreement between Beijing and Washington, the South China Sea. Can you remind the audience who are watching us from all around the world why South China Sea and freedom of access there is important for the world and the United States?
Well, it's important also for the claimant states and the U.S. and the entire world. 20% of the world's trade, some $5 trillion every year, goes through the South China Sea. There's tremendous fish, oil, gas reserves. It's also how Japan accessed the Middle East for oil, and it gives U.S. a way to directly transit to its allies like Singapore and visit other ports like Vietnam. So who controls it, the access through it and over it by air is of vital interest to Asia and really the entire world when you look at the supply chain of the global economy.
To that view, what's China's perspective there?
Geopolitically, that's totally right. I think that area, that region is pretty important for China for
It's the same reasons?
Some reasons, and military and economic security issues. And it is also very important for Chinese people because of this kind of mentality of integrity, sovereignty, sovereign rights from originated from a long history. And it's been there for thousands of years. People went there and found they are named the islands. So it's going to be very difficult for China to give up its sovereign rights claims. But the point is China has been promoting joint development. And it doesn't say, okay,
joint development.
Yes, joint development. So we can develop, we can use the resources together. But we have the sovereign right there.
So while keeping the ownership issue on the Chinese side, China owns this area, but we can jointly develop.
Yes.
I wonder what that idea. Do we have some certain examples elsewhere where other countries have tried this kind of claim over territories or region and then joint development?
To my knowledge, this is quite new, at least in the South China Sea, and maybe in the future in the East China Sea with Japan. So joint development could be possible. And this is a very new suggestion made by Chinese government, made by Premier Li Keqiang, I think maybe 2 years ago.
So at least China has been trying to find a midway solution.
Yes,
That is your point.
Yes.
Okay. Shanking, we just recently had a permanent court of arbitration decision that China's claim is, legally speaking, in terms of international law, doesn't have a strong basis at all. That was the court finding. But let's set aside the court finding, just set aside for the sake of discussion here. In response to the China's claim of history and sovereignty, what is the other side's counter-argument for that?
Well, of course, the U.S. doesn't take a position on the various claims of sovereignty. And back in these hundreds or thousands of years, the idea of a nation state as we conceive it today wasn't necessarily defined. So it's harder to define because other states in the region also have similar claims.
Right.
And this goes back to the nationalist Chinese government map of 1947 with the 11-dash line. And then when
now it's 9-dash
well,
lines.
when Chiang Kai-shek lost and retreated to Taiwan, Mao Zedong said everything that was his is now mine because I'm the true Chinese leader. So he cut off 2 lines in deference to communist brother Vietnam. So he actually trimmed it a bit.
I see.
So people talk about the 6 claimants in the South China Sea. I don't mention Taipei because it's basically the same Beijing claim, but it's Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and China. So it's really their history against China's history. And, he said a midway solution, but that's midway on their side of the discussion. Because if Vietnam or Philippines on, say, oil or gas exploration were to join in that joint exploration, so long as they acknowledge China's sovereignty, that's their way of acknowledging that the Chinese sovereignty. So it's kind of a trick for them to take that. And even if you acknowledge the sovereignty of these rocks, the question is, are they islands that then have a 200-mile economic exclusive zone, which you can then say are Chinese waters to stop U.S. ships from going through? And that's the big issue that the tribunal shot down. But I will admit that the U.S. is slightly compromised in pushing this issue because we ourselves have not ratified the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. And Paul Reichler, the lawyer, the American lawyer who argued the Philippines case, he actually made his name arguing against the United States in the 80s in a case we lost at the Convention on Law of the Sea on Nicaragua. So you can at least say that he's very objective.
Out of curiosity on that issue, do you see as a way of dealing with this issue in the future, do you see a possibility of the United States making any move to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea?
It's been Republican senators for the most part who have shot this down on a sovereignty issue. I've noticed some conservative voices now calling for ratification. And I think we're very likely going to have a Democratic Senate in the U.S. next year, no matter who wins the U.S. presidential election, because there are 24 Republican seats up and only 10 Democrat. So chances are we're going to have a Democratic Senate. So given the decision and the fact that we can't really fully back our friends in the region because we haven't ratified, I wouldn't be surprised if we move toward ratification in the next few years.
Okay. Jin Kai, about the U.S. policy pivot towards Asia, what's Chinese perspective on that? Does China firmly reject the policy as an undesirable one, or does China want to see different kind of, a modified kind of U.S. engagement in the region?
Well, in my view, I think China has been very tolerant about U.S. returning to Asia for years, and acknowledge the possibility and necessity of U.S. existence in this region for geopolitical and security issues concerns. The problem I see here is a triangle between China, U.S. and South Korea. So we see two solid lines and one dotted line. Two solid lines is the alliance relations between South Korea and the U.S. Pretty solid, strong. And the other solid line is economic tie between South Korea and China. And that's pretty solid. And the dotted line, U.S. competition with China. So it's not a stable triangle. And this concerns China. And I think this should be more concerning for South Korea, because this unstable triangle could shake South Korea's role and status constantly.
Indeed, it is a big headache in South Korea at this point, as you've been observing so far. Just briefly going back to the North Korean nuclear issues. In South Korea, there is some concern because of this South China Sea problems. North Korean nuclear weapons issue may be set aside, and they'll be allowed to go ahead and move quickly towards taking further steps. What's your view on that?
I think right now everybody are so busy, and they are also busy in North Korea. They've been doing missile tests.
Exactly.
And the problem is that we are not allowing them to do that, because we are constantly watching out the situation in the north. At the same time, we have troubles, our own troubles. We have to deal with these troubles. And that does not mean we are tolerant with the nuclear rights in North Korea. So the same policy will sustain.
Well, for South Korea, THAAD is all about how we can better defend ourselves against ever-increasing North Korea's nuclear capabilities. But the problem with China and also with Russia is that they are interpreting all this from the perspective of growing rivalry with the United States. So no matter how hard we try to convince them that THAAD is not targeting their missiles capability, it falls on deaf ears. I think the United States, I think it is very important for them to protect U.S. forces in Korea. I think that is the most important rationale to the United States to deploy THAAD. I think as for North Korea might be enjoying the situation here because THAAD issue, like it or not, is driving the wedge between the major stakeholder countries in the region. From purely militaristic point of view, THAAD is not a good news to North Koreans because it diminishes their offensive capability. But one of the side effects of THAAD has been that the THAAD issue has been driving the wedge between the major stakeholder countries in the region. You know, in order for the sanction to take some effect against North Korea, it is very important for the international community and stakeholder countries in the region to stay united against North Korea. But after the decision to deploy THAAD, you know, the chasm is developing between the major stakeholder countries in the region. So I think North Koreans are trying to take advantage of the situation. They sense that the chasm is developing between China and South Korea and then China and also the United States. So they are trying to take advantage of the situation. The nature of the relationship between the United States and China has been cooperation as much as it has been competition, but in more recent years, I think the relationship, the nature has become more of competition that is very worrisome. I think there are some issue areas where both countries would not really compromise, would not back down. I think a South China Sea issue is one of those issue areas. And one of the problems associated with the growing rivalry between the two countries in the region is that it is limiting our foreign policy choices. It is restricting our choices, policy choices against North Korea as well. So it is very worrisome situation here because there is not much leverage that we can exercise over this situation. I think you know, the region, Northeast Asian region, is once again being divided into two camps, if you will. You know, South Korea and the United States, and also Japan are on one side, and North Korea, China, and Russia are on the other. So yeah, sure, the region is being divided into two Cold War camps once again. As for Japan, I think Japan, to promote their strategic and defense interests, they seem to have placed all their bets on strengthening their alliance partnership with the United States. That is the reason why they scaled up their rhetoric against the South China Sea issue. But South Korea is located in this geopolitical position where we'll have to maintain good relations both with the United States and China. I think the Park Geun-hye government has done a pretty good job in doing so and maintaining balance between the United States and China. But North Korean nuclear weapons issue and the decision to deploy THAAD has done some damage to our relationship with China. So yeah, we are in very, very difficult situation right now. You know, I think it is very important for us, for South Korea, to reorganize national priorities. You know, it is very important for South Korea to redefine core, irreducible national interests, and we'll have to formulate our foreign policy. You know, these strategies based on those core, irreducible national interests. You know, if joining AIIB is in our core, irreducible economic interests, we should be able to do that. You know, if deploying THAAD is in our really important strategic and defense interests, and we should be able to go ahead and do it. So we got to redefine our core national interests, and it's very, very important for us to formulate our foreign policy based upon those core national interests. I think in the short run there's going to be a backlash. You know, China would not like this. You know, the United States would not like the way we behave. But in the long run, if we formulate and implement our foreign policy based on our core, irreducible national interests, I think the predictable pattern between South Korea and the United States, and between South Korea and the United States, our relationship with the great power countries in the region will become more predictable, and the predictable pattern of the relationship will emerge in the long run.
Sean King, what we observed in Mongolia recently, the ASEM summit, where actually, the way I see it, something close to shouting match occurred between China and Japan regarding overall the issues of East Asia altogether, including, I suppose, South China Sea issues. What do you see happening between China and Japan? Do you see China sees Japan as I don't know, United States kind of
representative in Asia? Right. Yes, yeah, I think so.
Right.
And they use that for their own domestic purposes too. Mm-hmm. But I think that Japan obviously for energy and trade issues is very interested in the South China Sea remaining open. It's supplying arms to the Philippines, and they see any decision on the South China Sea as maybe a precursor to something on the East China Sea in the Senkaku Islands. So I would say Japan definitely feels emboldened by the decision and wants to get out in front of it before it comes closer to their shores. So I'm not surprised that this little showdown took place. And yeah, I do think that China sees Japan as a stalking horse for America and Asia. And a lot of times when the Chinese Communist Party is bemoaning Japan and its domestic information, or not propaganda, you might say, it's to again make the Chinese Communist Party as the vanguard and defender of China against previous wrongs, but also by criticizing Japan, it's indirectly criticizing the United States without naming the United States. So the showdown in Mongolia was very interesting indeed.
Right, indeed. Everyone was closely watching that. Overall, however, a little bit right on the side note, however, which is still an important issue. The economic relationship between Japan and China, we consistently hear that economic tie between China and South Korea is very strong and very important and so on. From Beijing perspective, what is the economic relationship between China and Japan, two major economic powers, not only the region but around the world? What is it like at this point?
Well, as far as I know, the economic tie between China and Japan has been fluctuating up and down in the past few years. And well, for some time, Chinese people say, okay, maybe South Korea will be the number one, the number one trade partner in Asia.
I see.
To China. It's well replacing Japan. And I personally think that could be a very good sign to make that solid line even more stronger for China and South Korea.
Okay, according to the chairman's statement, two issues on the top of the list. The number one is North Korea's provocative acts ever since this year. The forced nuclear test in January and followed by missile test and all those kind of things. That is number one. The second one issue is about South China Sea issues. But in terms of the debate and discussions, I would say the second one, the South China Sea issue, the hottest issue and the biggest issue to be discussed in the forum, I think. China, they say that China was successfully defended such that no specific mentioning of that permanent court of arbitrations award is not included in chairman's statement. But it's not at the end of the game. It's gonna last. And also it showed that yes, ASEAN countries has been divided in the face of ever assertive China, even though they have been forming their single stance because of the big powers neighboring like China, particularly China, but India and Japan, all others. So that has been a big test to ASEAN's identity and integrity and centrality as well. So I mean, let's see how it's gonna happen in coming EAS I think it's November this year again. I think we need to be very specific about it. Okay. Deployment of third system is done by US, not our government. So our decision is not to deploy those third in the Korean Peninsula, but to agree to the US government to deploy that third system in Korea in order to protect American soldiers stationed in this soil. And as a kind of byproduct of that deployment, South Korean people and our country maybe benefits from it. So it wasn't. So the issue is the South Korea decision to allow North U.S. to deploy that. That was specific, and as long as North Korea's threats through missiles as well as maybe armed with nuclear warheads has the ability to harm or to attack U.S. forces in Korea, then the United States has a valid reason to worry about the safety of the sons and daughters, and they may demand South Korea to allow them to do so. And given that North Korea's threat has been increasing very rapidly these years, and given the fact that we can benefit from U.S. deployment of the third system, then yeah, I mean, it was not terribly difficult decision for our government to make. although the political divide has been very, very hard, and that created a room for the China to make an issue with a diplomatic issue with the South Korea. I wish that she can build our South Korea's foreign policy cloud such that we are a global power. We has a firm stance, firm says on many issues, not just strategic issues, environmental issues, developmental issues, all those kind of issues. And we can kind of contribute to the common cause of international community. So, I mean, we cannot just demand other countries to take side with us vis-a-vis North Korea. No, we have to put North Korea challenge in the global standard. North Korea challenge is not just against South Korea's security itself. North Korea challenge is against global norm of a non-proliferation regime. North Korea's challenge is against the number one principle of United Nations, that is international peace and security. It's not South Korea versus North Korea issue. It is North Korea against international community in general. So the kind of multilateral forum is a very good places that our government, our president, and our foreign policy officials should put their utmost effort to achieve what we want.
One of the cases where we saw or observed South Korea's dilemma was July 14th, vice ministerial gathering of the foreign ministry chiefs or vice ministers of foreign ministries of three nations, Korea, Japan, and the United States. And interestingly, United States and Japan, of course, expectedly had some strong words about the South China Sea, and South Korean vice minister had to be more balanced, to say the least, about this different views and all that. So it really tells us, Korea is in a very interesting position, as you reminded us about how economic side of interaction is very important and so on. What do you see here? Do you recognize enough? No, not you necessarily, but do you think Beijing itself recognize enough about Seoul's efforts to kind of keep balance here, doing as much as it can while it's working on the THAAD issue, also like South China Sea issue, not trying to go all the way?
Yes. I think Beijing clearly, very clearly see this. The problem is the strong tie between Seoul and Washington has been existing there for too many years, and it's so strong to be broken. And however, try to draw Seoul to his arms, to his embrace, is going to be very difficult for Seoul to make any significant change regarding its U.S. policy. So that's created kind of a dilemma. Very difficult choices for South Korea to make. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's a THAAD deployment or some kind of the other South China Sea issue. So it will always be very difficult for South Korea to do this.
I'm sure this discussion can go on for a long time. We have interesting, different views from United States and China here, but we have to end our program. And I want to thank big time Jin Kai and Sean King for your valuable insights today.
Thank you.
And we want to, of course, thank our viewers who have joined from all around the world to watch our discussion here. And next time we will also continue on having these shows on important issues that matters for Korea as well as the world. So then next time we want to ask you once again to join us. And until then, this has been Kim Byung-Ju. Goodbye.